Hi, welcome to the Opposite of Infantry, Episode 3. This is Kevin Crowsyn, and today I am fortunate to have Travis on the show today. Welcome, Travis.
I'm glad to be here. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being on your podcast, so I appreciate you returning the favor and supporting this new project. So, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, about your projects, your organizations. You have a quite the extensive background. You've been kind of jack of all trades, done it all, military style. But tell us what you've been up to, some of your latest projects, and kind of the cliff notes of your military career.
Yeah, absolutely. I was glad to be here, and so my career is definitely probably the weirdest and most unique. It's probably a little biased on myself, but yeah, I was Airborne Infantry for 5 years. I was a active duty recruiter for 4 years. Figured out the pay chart finally and crossed over to the dark side and the infinite wisdom of branching. I went from infantry to ordnance, and then I was a maintenance PL and did a whole lot of maintenance stuff for a long time, and then I went to the career course and volunteered from there to go to the old guard and spent a couple years in the old guard. And then I was probably the only captain that's ever really tried to get into the Pentagon. So I followed the coattails of one of my previous supervisors and got to the Pentagon in the G1 of all things for 4 years and then retired. So it's kind of that. And so now I'm a licensed or certified, not licensed, executive life coach and do a lot of consulting work and do a lot of other stuff for the state of Texas. But my biggest passion is my podcast where I interview vets to tell the funny stories of our lives. If you've been in
Mhm.
the Army or military at all for more than a day and a half, you've got stories that are just shenanigans and stupidity, and I love them. They're the best part. And so I tragically had a couple of my friends kill themselves, and I think part of that's they forgot how to laugh about their experiences. And so it's kind of the goal is to get together, laugh, do this, and hopefully to prevent people from making a terrible decision. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate it. We've told some fun stories when I was on your show, so I'm sure we have a similar angle. We're focusing on the less hardcore among us. You've seen my grid of the lower left corner being the less physically intense, less violent experiences, going diagonally up to the more physically intense, more violent experiences, and everything in between. So plot some points. Tell us a couple places that you've been on that chart that stick out to you in terms of I bet you could stick a pin in damn near every spot on that given your experience. But so what are some sections that you would really plug that stood out at various points in your career?
oh, definitely. I mean, obviously the top right being the
Yeah.
most physically and most violent. I was Airborne Infantry during the peak of the war, 05, 06, 07.
Hmm.
It kind of speaks for itself. You know, I was deployed 3 times for 3 years in a row. It's experienced a whole lot in that community. And then rapidly going from there to recruiting in
Yeah.
2008, it went to the very bottom left of everything and like not physically demanding and not violent at all. Though there was some screaming involved. Does that
Yeah.
count? So,
Yeah.
um, but so it's a hard adjustment. You know, I wrote a white paper on how do we not to do that. Don't take units that just deploy and they get home and 2 months later you're a recruiter. It's like it's a rough transition. You
Yeah.
know, you're trying to deal with a lot just coming home in general, much less having to not carry a gun around everywhere you go.
Mhm.
And then going obviously when I was in maintenance, I was in a high Mars unit and doing maintenance PL and maintenance control officer and all that kind of stuff, and
Mhm.
um, moderately physically demanding, but not really that violent. I mean, the job of shooting high Mars
Yeah.
is freaking awesome,
Yeah.
but we were in Dubai, so Rock Cafe was much more difficult. But then the old guard is pretty demanding.
Yeah.
It's a unique physical demand
Yeah.
of like standing at attention for 70 minutes is freaking tough. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie, it sucked. That's a hard test to pass. And I was
Yeah.
6'4", so it's a long ways if you pass out.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously not violent. And then the Pentagon
So
was,
may
you know,
so maybe left side, but little higher up. Well,
yeah,
maybe
it's
mid-level, but definitely higher up on the physical
oh
demand
yeah,
side. So higher up
August
on the left.
August in the cemetery is hot, humid, and you're wearing a wool coat.
Yeah.
It sucks. I was like, man, Iraq was actually a little better at times than that because like at least I can wipe my face and
Yeah.
in the cemetery you're like just dripping and you can't move. So it's kind of a unique physical
Yeah.
demand, but a little bit of all of them. The violence only was one little blip in my career was pretty violent there for a little while.
Yeah. So let's want to dive right in. I love the compare and contrast, and you have kind of the ultimate flip. You go from the extreme upper right hand corner to the extreme lower left hand corner in succession. And that's kind of really the gimmick of this whole show is so you have that, you experience that flip. So first off, what just absolutely didn't work about that flip? What experience did you have going from actual literal infantry to the opposite of infantry? What adjustments did you have to make? And what are some stories or experiences that are like, ooh, this isn't going to work here?
Yeah, the first, the hardest part, like I said before, is the timing of it, which I've always thought was a mistake on the Army's part to make that so fast. I was to back up just a little bit for me was so I was one
Sure.
of the that we were deployed in '06 for like 5, 6 months, and we got home on December 7th, and then which is a unique day to come home, and then the formation, and we're like, hey, we're going right back. We were I was wheels up going to Iraq on January the 4th. So within the same 3 weeks, I was on a whole nother deployment.
Hmm.
And so I was home at my house or my parents' house on leave. And the day after Christmas, my phone rings and they're like, hey, Green Corvette, let's go. And so the whole unit came back. We're wheels up again, gone. And so when I came back from the surge in '07, after 10 more months after being already deployed for the previous 5.5, we're pretty wired.
Yeah.
And so it's like we've gotten a lot of fights over that 16-month ish period. And so to go from that to leave to straight to recruiter school and graduate, and I had orders, I was gone.
Hmm.
I got home in November of '07 and I was in East or North Houston by April.
Hmm.
And it's a pretty quick turnaround as far as with things that take place in a violent environment. And so I've
Hmm.
always that was probably the toughest thing for me personally. Now doing the job, leadership techniques and stuff, the hardest thing is not having soldiers. Recruiting is unique, as you well know, and
Yeah.
just going from like being a squad leader in charge of 8 dudes, and like you kind of have a unique authority when you're a
Hmm.
squad leader, to recruiting where you're in charge of yourself,
Yeah.
and and that was pretty difficult. But the most difficult for me was having leaders telling me about stuff. And I'm like, you've never shot a gun before. Like,
Yeah. Huh.
and it was my first boss was great. And he openly admitted, so we had 3 infantry guys and 3 tankers as recruiters. And he was a fueler way back in like the early '90s.
Hmm.
And so he openly admitted, like, hey, I am not what y'all are.
Yeah.
And so it opened that dialogue. It helped us a lot. And he was like, hey, I was the worst thing I ever did was Kosovo for like 3 weeks, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, I filled up some trucks and I never even carried a weapon. And he was cool
Yeah.
about it. And the next guy was different. He was like, I deployed once, and he did corporal recruiting and he never saw combat ever
Hmm.
again. So he had his
Yeah.
one quick deployment. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was having leaders that were different. And recruiting, it's hard to explain, but you have the enlisted side, which is permanent recruiters. I know it's
Yeah.
changing those roles and stuff, but now,
Yeah.
but officers are not. All the
Yeah.
officers are just all the branches, and they're doing all their things, and so
Hmm.
you have this weird like dichotomy of leadership,
Yeah.
because officers, like, when I crossed over, I learned, I'm like, man, it's cutthroat. It's a
Oh yeah.
cutthroat business, and like if you don't make the rank, you're done,
Yep.
and you got 2 shots and you're out. And enlisted's like, I'll go to the board of the next 9 years. I'm good. And so you can just kind of hang out. It's
Yeah.
just it's a unique clash where first sergeants or master sergeants and stuff, there's a
Mhm.
billion of in recruiting.
Yep.
They have this comfort, I guess I would say. That was probably the hardest thing for me to hit, was there was this hey, they can't
Yeah.
kick me out. And
Yeah.
then the officers are very doing this stuff. So I was kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
That was rough.
So you had that dialogue. I like you brought up. You had that dialogue with your initial one, who was very. You said he was very open and said, and that's kind of approach I take. I was like, hey, I'm not a combat guy. I have a different skill set. I'm very good at what I do, but what I
Mhm.
do is not what you do, and that's fine. And that's kind of a whole theme here. But that's still that doesn't mean we can't poke fun, have the sibling rivalry.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure you've either said or thought, "Hey, slig, pogue, leg." I'm sure those are words that were at some point in your career
Oh, yeah.
were thought or said. And I think that's just part of the game. That's part of our culture, and we have fun with it on both sides. How was that? Was there any times that you felt yourself crossing the line or finding resentment of these POGs, these non-combat guys telling you what to do? Or was it, like I said, when you said there was that open dialogue, what if there wasn't that open dialogue? Was there
Oh,
ever
yeah.
kind of any tension or resentment that came up being a combat guy flipping to this strange, softer, gentler world?
Well, for me, it happened before that, honestly. So,
Okay. Yeah.
so we were doing battalion level air assault missions across Iraq, which is like 30 to 40 helicopters and, a massive movement of personnel. It's freaking, it was awesome. I'm not gonna lie, it was awesome.
Yeah.
But for us, all the guys, and back then it was all guys. I know that's changed. That's fine. But we for us, we didn't know what the Army just did all the realignment, made all the new brigades. And so we didn't even know what 407, the support battalion, even was. We never heard of it,
Mhm.
because like we just went to the field and we shot stuff and came back, and we never ever ate hot chow in the field. We always MREs. We just didn't. None of that stuff mattered. The only thing that mattered to us was like, hey, it's a long walk. We'd prefer if a truck came and picked us up. And they were always kind of late, and it kind of pissed us off. But going out there, it was like you can only fit 12 in a truck. Coming back, it's a good 40. It's like we're going home. But during that deployment, it hit all of us. Our first mission, because we were doing massive movements on foot after we got dropped off, and it's freaking hot. We've been in country for like a week and a half, and you're hitting 115, 120, and you're trying to do a 12-click movement. That sucks. So we had heat casualties becoming a problem. Well, these guys were awesome, and on our first resupply, we were on the ground for like 3 days. They're pushing these bags out of the helicopter and ice in these bags. So when we got our bottles of water for resupply out of these bags, they were in ice. And we're
Mhm.
like, y'all are the greatest people I've ever seen in my entire life. You don't understand. And then like the next mission, there was like little Gatorade packets as you get out of the DFAC. We're like, we've got cold Gatorade. Can life get any better? I submit that it cannot. It was just like, we came back. I remember we were high-fiving those dudes. Like,
Yeah.
like y'all get it. And I
Mhm.
think I never really got into the POG and,
Mhm.
I mean, I use POG. I mean, I was
Yeah.
known as the POGy guy, because my rucksack was always full of Skittles and gummy bears and stuff. But I did it for morale more, and plus
Yeah.
I have a massive sweet tooth. But when you're rucking and then life sucks, like 3 gummy lifesavers is the best thing in the world, and like morale just goes up. I don't care who you are, you feel better doing that. And Sour Patch Kids are great. But so that was a big thing. For me, I've always had the belief that if no matter what your job is, do it well,
Yeah.
and 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 know that like the infantry and combat arms in general is a very small percentage of any branch of anything that does the fighting. Everybody else is supporting everybody. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you're Navy, Air Force, like do your job and do it well. And they did it well. And man, I love those dudes for that.
Mhm.
And cold water was, I cannot tell you what that does to morale. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And so getting into recruiting was a huge, like the lack of team, I think really hurt me the most. It
Mhm.
was the first time in my career. Now, granted, I was only in the Army for that point for like 4 or 5 years, 5 years. And that really kind of bothered me. It's like it became this weird individual fight. And then when I crossed over to officer, kind of saw a little bit of similarities. There's more similarities being a junior officer in recruiting than anything else I've ever seen. Where
Really?
Yeah, where people just it's my world, don't cross into my lane. And I was like, we're on the what the heck is going on? And that was probably the most common thing I've seen
Mhm.
is this like universal cover one. And
Yeah.
when I was in maintenance, it was the same way. The junior enlisted maintenance to the senior enlisted drove me freaking bonkers. It was their world. Don't talk to them. The warrant, we went at it because it
Mhm.
just drove me nuts. And I'm like, what happened? Because I came from a place where like if we don't destroy the weakest link on our team, either he needs to get on board or we need to cut him from the team, we all die. And so that's
Yeah.
probably the hardest thing to grasp was like not not being on kind of the Three Musketeers motto,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So did you ever encounter people that acted as if things in the bureaucratic environments, whether it be recruiting or as an officer, Did you ever encounter scenarios that were just flat out ridiculous to you? Like, hey, I've been in real world combat, life or
Well,
death
yeah.
situations. This is not that serious, folks, but it's like super serious and intense, but in
Oh
this
yeah.
like really ridiculous bureaucratic way. Like, tell us
Oh
some
yeah.
of those experiences.
So I was in Dubai, and I was the MCO for a little while, and also maintenance PL. So I had to give you these briefs on vehicles, and it's ridiculous. And we're getting just all the staff. I mean, all the S's were just getting just destroyed on a regular basis by this one. I won't name him. That's not nice, but we called him Ogre for a reason. And but he would just go nuts. And it's like, if the title on every single slide is not Arial font size 32, bold, blah blah blah, just going freaking ballistic. And I'm like,
Slideology.
oh man, I'm a brand new second lieutenant. I came from the infantry world and recruiting. We don't do slides. So like for me, I'm getting thrown into this. I'm like, but I have experience. Like I've got more time in the army than you do,
Mhm.
almost. I mean, we're like this close. And I'll tell you two funny stories if you want.
Oh
So
yeah.
one of them was he was just going nuts, and so I started making the slide, and I noticed that the commander would skip over like 90% of what was on the slides.
Oh,
You
sure.
know, and it drove me nuts. I'm like, why are we spending all this time on a 34 slide deck when he only reads 3 of them, at least in front of all of us? So
Yeah.
I added a slide on mine that a dude was missing out in the desert. And
Hmm.
I put it in like a real small thing in the bottom and just kind of, but all it was the right font and everything was great. And it was on there. And I told all the staff, like, do not point this out. I told the commanders, don't, I know that I have a point of mine that we're missing a guy on a truck in the woods out in the desert. And
Hmm.
4 weeks go by before this guy catches it. He's like, what the hell? I was like, oh, you got me.
Yeah.
Like the joke was like, I'm like, you're so worried about the font. You didn't realize
Oh
that I
yeah.
have a person missing for a month. It
Yeah.
wasn't.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's kind of funny.
My
Then I
my
we just
best my best prank that I did similar to that, I wanted to see, so as well-trained NCOs, you write your own NCO ER draft, right? You wanna
right,
if you want it done right, do it yourself. And then
right.
you find that 90% of it will just get rubber stamped. So in the senior raider drafted, I put like pissed excellence and it outworked everyone. Audie Murphy would be proud, like just some off the wall, like ridiculous
I
stuff
love
that went all the way to like reviewer before
right.
like it like
I'm caught it.
they're just everyone yep so and I'm just and then they were pissed at me. They're like, hey, what? I'm like, you didn't read it. Like
Yeah.
I'm
Can't be mad. I think
yeah,
I'm great.
yeah. And I'm just like, hey, like, and that would have been amazing if it made it all the way to the to like iPerms. It
Oh,
didn't,
yeah.
but
That'd been great.
it came pretty
That'd been the
close.
best. Because that goes to a board. That'd be great. If
Yeah.
I'm on the board, I'm like, I don't care about anything else. Promote this
Yeah.
guy. This is
But
funny.
that's yeah, that's about that's so I've done similar. That's about
Yeah.
my best kind of office thing where I was like, oh, almost got you.
It drove me nuts. I'm like, we're worried about font and font size and bold. I'm like, seriously?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
you don't even read the damn slide. And then it was funny. We were doing a mass casualty training thing because that was our biggest fear while we were there.
Mhm.
And I drew a card now to be a casualty. So I'm laying under this Humvee trying to stay in the shade, and my card had like I had a busted leg or something like that. And he walks by, and everyone's freaking out. You're doing this drill, trying to get accountability. And, where's the PL? And I am the casualty. So, and he's like, hey, Womack, I was going to ask you, what you have to kiss up to get that CIB? I was like, oh, sir, you're sorry, you got the wrong idea. No, I didn't know about it at all. It's, oh, well, what'd you do? I was like, well, crazy story. I was at the PX and I just saw this. I was looking for the biggest badge I could find. I thought I'd just put on my uniform and see if anybody said anything. No one's ever questioned it until right now. He's like, ha, 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 ha.
Yeah.
How'd you get that? I'm like, I took 2 direct hits by RPG to my Humvee. What'd you do for your cab? And he was like, some guy got in a big fight. I'm like, you're field artillery. If you're getting in a fight in the game of chess, we're all dead.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
it's called the King of Battle. Do you know
some
how to play chess?
something has gone drastically wrong.
Yeah. I was like, all the pawns. I was a pawn. We call ourselves the Queen of Battle, but I was like, it was just funny. We didn't get along if you can't tell.
Yes.
We played heads quite a bit. So
Sounds like it. Yeah. But again, that's part of that is I refer to it as the sibling rivalry.
yeah.
You're gonna have that. You're gonna have personality conflicts. You're gonna have the my team is better than your team, which, hey, that builds camaraderie, that breeds competition, which a huge amount of military, they're alpha personalities. So of course that's going to be productive by and large. Now, we all accept that, and you've told us about different stories. Has there been any times where you've either seen or been party to that line being crossed beyond the sibling rivalry, beyond the
Oh
just
yeah.
the trash talk of the day, to where this combat versus non-combat, or this my team is better than your team,
Oh yeah.
goes too far?
It's what I think the opposite of infantry definitely would that exist.
Mhm.
I personally think it happens more. It's the green on green or blue on blue,
Mm.
whatever the term is. I don't it
Yeah.
changes all the time. But it's we the infantry is a great example. Is between mechanized and airborne. Like we don't get along like at all. We are literally stepbrothers, and
Mhm.
it's literally if you've seen the movie Stepbrothers, it's like that. It's like we hate each other until it's that scene of like, do we become best friends? Yes, yep, yep. It's that. But like then they threw in strikers, and like we like mechanized and airborne just collectively hated strikers. We're like, this is the stupidest idea ever.
I love that. I've never heard that. The Stepbrothers analogy. That's
Yeah,
that's awesome.
it literally is kind of like that because I don't know. I've always used the analogy, and I've my combat experiences with the airborne. Airborne is a very unique place, but I always feel like, "What's it like being in the airborne?" I'm like, "Oh, it's the greatest thing. Everybody you work with is just as stupid as you are." And I tell everybody, they're like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, jumping off a plane is pretty stupid. Like the plane works, it can land, but like it's a thing of like I loved, and I was so attracted to the idea of like when you're in a plane and they're about to open those doors, you realize you can look around and you see every single person being like, well, I may be a colonel or a private or anything in between. Gravity doesn't care.
Yeah.
And I loved it. That was like straight crack to me. And it was everybody's mortality becomes prevalent. And I loved
Yeah.
it. And so I think there's the airborne's unique in that they think they're
Absolutely.
better because
Yeah.
of that reason.
Yeah.
And and it's literally why that exists. Is like we generally think we're better than everybody because we do something really, really stupid. And
I love
um
again, I wanna expand on your Stepbrothers
yeah,
analogy though. So is
please.
there any other, so that's a movie that really hits home to you of the
Yeah.
culture. Is there any other, like, movies, shows, scenes that kind of, like, really struck a chord of, like, that's real? I've seen it, I've lived it, in terms of just the ridiculousness of military life or bureaucracy,
Yeah.
in addition to Stepbrothers?
Well, there's I'll give you 2, if I may. One is,
Yeah, yeah.
there's, uh, your opinion on these, anybody else's opinion is not it's not really relevant in this, but,
Mhm.
300, American Sniper
Mhm.
and Marcus Luttrell's Lone Survivor. Sorry, brain just stopped there for a second. Both of those did a really, really, really good job. American Sniper, though, I think is one of the best because it shows the progress of the
Mhm.
war, of all those deployments. Like the Humvees were like, "Oh, we found some 2x4s." And then by the end of the movie, they have like a super up armored MRAPs and stuff. It shows the progression. I was like, that's so accurate. They
Mhm.
nailed that so
Yeah.
well. And there's a scene there where he walks in. I told you about before, is it opens the door and the 550 cord on the water bottle was the anchor to make the door close. I was like, man, everybody had that. And then
Yep.
in Lone Survivor at the very beginning, when he's knocking on the wood doors, wake his buddy up to go for a run. I was like,
Mhm.
that's super accurate. And the guy's hanging out in the middle of the sun with a camo net,
Yeah.
BS and playing cards and stuff. That stuff I love.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but a movie wise that I like to go back to, it was real prevalent back in 2007. It was 300. And it's
Mhm.
extreme and it's the CGI's. You watch it now, you're like, yeah, that's terrible. But it's the scene where Leonidas and his guys are approached by the other Greek guys and they're like, well, we're here to fight. And they have like pitchforks and sticks and what's your profession?
Yeah.
I think that scene resonates the topic of what this podcast is more than
Mhm.
anything else. Of you have guys that we can fight, and we has a this is what we do,
Yeah.
and it had this clash. But what I love about that movie is like, yeah, there was mockery at that
Mhm.
moment,
Sure.
but they're like, hey, they kind of belittle them, and that can be
Mm.
healthy and unhealthy in a ways, but they still let them fight.
Sure.
They still participated.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what we need you to do is stop being a farmer for a minute and come fight. You know,
Yeah.
And I think that's the, um, you can make fun of each other and be like, "Oh,
Well, yeah,
you're a 42 Alpha at one point. Like, oh, you're just an S1 clerk. You don't know how to do
yeah,
this stuff." Until
yeah,
it's like, "Hey, you probably should buy a gun. You should probably get a gun. Let's go." And then like, but there's
yeah.
an expectation of like, "Hey, let's go do this." And it's a great place to be when you can cross
Okay. Right.
when
It's
they
like the old proverb of it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in war.
oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
But it's true though. But I
Mhm.
think it goes from, I think you can, on your chart, if you're a
Mhm.
job that's on the left side, it's easier to go left to right than right to left. It's really hard for infantry guys to be like, I need to go do what with my life insurance? What?
Yeah.
Like, can you not just do that and just hit submit? Like, why do I
Yeah.
need it's like, I think there's a desire on the left side of those MOSs to like, hey, we could go to the range. This is awesome. And
Mhm.
then the right side was what we do all the time.
Yeah. It's
We'll
a
go over
novelty, and I can speak
right.
to that. Like, I've some of the highlight like, a lot of people don't realize, like, what we do at basic training when we're, like, shooting chalk rounds out of, like, the AT-4 thing and shooting a
Shot
50 cal,
40
like,
40
there's
Magnum
a lot of
allegedly.
us, that's the only time we will ever do that in our
Mhm.
entire career. So, like, that's a lot of I mean, for someone who's in a combat arms, you might not ever that might not even be a core memory. That's just something
Right.
that is long forgotten. Whereas like someone like me, that is the only time I've ever done that. So I
Exactly.
was like, yeah, back in basic, that was so cool. Whereas someone else, like, you even remember that at basic?
Right. I
It's
don't remember
just,
basic training at all.
yeah.
I've
But
surpassed it. Right.
yeah, and it was still 20 plus years ago for me, but that's something that I remember because I think I knew at the time, like, hey, I'm a reserve admin guy. Like, this isn't something that I'm going to get to experience. So being
Right.
able to be in the moment, or like getting to even having a Humvee assigned to me on deployment, I was like, this is cool. I get a Humvee. Like,
Today's the day.
yeah, right. Like, this is awesome. A big cool truck, and it's just like I think we forget that depending on where you are on that spectrum, the novelty and the excitement of things is taken for granted. Whereas, like you said, if an infantry guy might be like, "Oh man, I need to spend an hour in S1 to figure out what an
Hey.
S1 guy might think is fairly
Right.
basic stuff that's just routine that
Mhm.
they can do with their eyes closed." But on the flip side, just going to the range to even be able to shoot this stuff is like, this is
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, yeah. It's a weird dichotomy for sure, and I think there's both sides need to understand that kinda stuff.
Oh yeah.
Any job, you know, I becoming a loggy for me was hugely eye opening.
Mhm.
When I went to school to learn the magnitude of what we can do, I'm like, holy crap, you know. And we had to
Mhm.
do it. We had to do a class on how to do ship to ship transfer, and I'm like, I am going from infantry guy years ago to this, and I'm like, we can we have ships. Like, what the crap? That is not in the brochure. And they're like, go through like, yeah, the army has more boats than the navy, which is actually a
Yeah.
true statement. But
Yeah.
they have more
More
ships.
aircraft than the Air Force.
But it's like there's different versions of it, but when you go do the ships, you're like, I'm like, "No, no, no. I will jump out of a
Mhm.
plane before I ever do anything in the ocean." Like, I do
Yeah.
not like I like that's just good job on Navy
Yeah.
SEALs for jumping in the ocean and nope, 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 nope. I don't like sharks. Not a fan.
Absolutely. There was another point you said earlier that I wanted to touch on. That you said that you found that recruiting was similar. You found it parallel and similar to being a junior officer in terms of
Yeah.
bureaucracy, the cutthroat, being kind of lacking the teamwork. If you can expand on that of your kind of officer versus enlisted experience, kind of is in the same parallel that we're talking about. We talked about combat versus non-combat. Are there parallels that you've seen of the combat versus non-combat dichotomy in the officer versus enlisted? Obviously,
Oh,
they have
absolutely.
different ones, but what other sort of parallels can you identify that are similar in that extreme versus not extreme
Oh, yeah.
mentality?
Well, there's I probably have seen more of that than I have even I mean, it's fun to just someone messes up, "Oh, dang legs." They don't know what they're doing, and that's just funny,
Yeah.
but, it can be derogatory in that no matter what, no matter what the tone is, but, um being enlisted for 9 years, you kinda get taught to like, "Oh, freaking officers." Oh, look, it's
Yeah.
the new, he's going to probably tell us, this is how we're going to go to the range. He's never seen a range, and we've done it. But as you work your way through the
Mhm.
ranks, when I was a squad leader, I was spoiled rotten with my officers,
Mhm.
though, because I had back-to-back Green Berets. So, so I was like, you've been deployed long enough, been in the Army. And so I had like just two stuff. But before them, I had two guys that were kind of like, we may not make it all out. Like, sir, you are literally loading your magazine upside down. What? That is not, that's a true story. It's just like, you are not helping the Kool-Aid right now. And so I've seen a lot I think that is actually for me in my career, I saw a whole lot more of that. Like, it's funny until it's
Mhm.
not funny stuff.
Yeah.
And particularly from the enlisted side was brutal towards officers and still is, you
Yeah.
know. And there's a lot of lieutenants that you get taught like you're kind of important. You know, when you
Yeah.
finish whatever commissioning source it is, and you come into it, and you're like, "Oh man, this is interesting." But the for me, it was hard because I was when I was a PL, I had a year and a half longer experience in the Army than my platoon sergeant.
Mm.
And so it was we butted heads because
I bet.
he was used to walking all over lieutenants, and I'm like, "Nah, dude, that's not how this is gonna work." You know? You
Not
know,
today.
and so it was interesting, like, I went from E3 to E6 in 49 months, and so
Mhm.
I've been in E6 longer than you have,
Yeah.
and I crossed over and stuff, so it's just it was a unique relationship. The guy that replaced him, we really butted heads, and it was just kind of I had to learn a lot because I was at E6 literally 3 months before that. And
Mhm.
so it was really hard for me to cross over. And the officer side was brutal.
Mm.
And that's driven by the Army's rating system and
Yeah.
how we do
Up
OERs. And
up or out.
yeah, but it's not up and out. It is just it's this fight for that top block. And NCOs didn't have to do with it back then. It was just like you get 1-on-1, you get 2-on-1, you get whatever, and you
Yeah.
just move on. And like you're as long as you keep staying in, you're probably gonna make the next rank at some point. But you can get almost so the it's do or die kind of changed when they added the top block, similar to the rating of the whatever it is, you can only do one of every 9
Yeah, yeah.
until you are,
20 24%
100%.
new
Yeah.
standard. Yep.
Yeah, so that when they added that, it changed the game a little bit. But
Yeah.
officers is like brutal, you
Yeah.
know. And so that 49% cutoff for
Right.
top blocks. And so it's like, man, if you're a battalion commander, you got 4
Yeah.
captains. Well, guess what? One of them gets a top block. The other
Yeah.
3 just by default are not. And it
Yeah.
was really hard when I actually got the old guard. It's like you get the old guard, the Ranger Regiment, all these places where like to get there, you're already really good.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really interesting. I was really kind of intimidated when I first arrived. I was like, man, how good do you got to be to perform here? And like here's all my peers in the old guard, like they're all, I mean, every one of them went off to be aide de camp for a 2-star
Mhm.
or the Congressional Fellowship or the White House Fellowship and all these things. I'm like, dang, I'm retiring. This is not looking good.
Yeah.
I'm eventually retiring. And so it's like I designed a gun that the tomb guards carry,
Mhm.
and I didn't get a top block. I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
what else I can do. And it's not about running because
Mm.
it wasn't about that. So it's just
Yeah.
kind of a differences of that. And I think that's for me, that bickering is actually worse. I would say it's
Yeah.
way, way worse
Yeah.
than and you're still in. I'm
Mm.
so removed from my combat
Yeah.
days. And so I got to during the peak of my combat time and a little bit of post, the war was still really going on. And so
Yeah.
there's like this camaraderie. Hey, we're all on the same team. Let's go do it and do our job well. And
Mhm.
so I got to see a whole lot more of the like officer NCO like disconnect.
Yeah.
And it still goes on. When I was in the Pentagon, our whole team was all officers. There's like
Mhm.
at the time there was like 76 on our team, and we had one NCO.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is where we get a bad name right here.
Yeah.
Is that we're literally in a room, in a boardroom in the Pentagon, and we're making decisions that affect like 300,000 people's career. Like that's a big deal. And then
Yeah.
we do something like the GED of the career course, or the GED. What's the master's degree test you have to take? Not the
I'm gonna
MCAT. whatever the
Yeah.
standardized test is
Yeah. Yeah.
to qualify for GRE. GRE. I think
Jerry. Yeah. Yeah.
so every captain's required to take the GRE at the captain's career course. Man, you would have thought we killed their firstborn. I mean, they were just like livid. And the
Oh, yeah.
NCOs are like, there's officers over getting free education. I'm like, you have the free, it's called TA. None of you use
Yeah.
it. It's like, it's just like this, like never ending back and forth. And that always
Of
drove me
course.
crazy. It still
Yeah.
does. And
One.
I hated that as a commander.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
One.
Go ahead. Sorry.
There's one community that I think that gets a pass on this, and I'll see if you agree with me. Is I deployed with the hospital unit, and later on I did medical recruiting. Medical officers, I think, in my experience, are the only ones that kind of get a pass from all communities because they're
Yeah.
like, "You're a surgeon. I don't care if you look 8 up in formation." Like they might
Yeah.
snicker. Like we've seen like having deployed in a hospital, like a proper hospital unit in Kosovo, like it's a reserve hospital unit, mind you. So these are people who are like literally Monday through Friday, doctor so and so,
Yeah.
nurse so and so in a real hospital, not in the military, who got plucked up from their lives and now they're in some faraway land and they're like, "Hey, let's have formation."
Right.
And you want
Right.
you want to talk like again, it's one of those like some communities, because we had Big Red One that we were kind of
Oh, yeah.
derivative of. So I heard some people like, "Oh my God, like what is happening? Like what is happening in this formation?" And we're like, "They're doctors and nurses. Like give them a break." They're like, "All right." And
Yeah.
that's one of those. I think that's the only community I've ever seen to where if that was anyone else, they'd be like, "There, you're jacked up. This is a soup sandwich. What is going on?"
The chaplain corps. But if it's
Whereas
like,
when you go into
just go along.
medical, you're like, "Yeah, they're all right. All right." If stuff goes down, you're really gonna want them around.
Yeah. That's a very true. I think
And they're not here. And the thing is, they're not here for that. I don't care if they can shoot
yeah.
or march or salute
Right.
properly. Like
If
that's not.
if they're shooting, we're screwed. So
Yeah,
I think that the PAs
exactly.
get a good reputation because like most PAs are prior enlisted, most of them.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and there's actually a very high number of those that are prior infantry enlisted, which is really crazy, or medical for sure, obviously former medics and stuff. So I agree with that totally. I was in OCS, and the barracks next to us was the commissioning course
Mhm.
for the 3-week prep course, whatever it is. It's real short
Yeah,
for
yeah.
lawyers and
This
medical. And
this
so
is
like every morning,
this is our terminology, and this is how to put a uniform together type
it
stuff.
was entertaining to watch. 'Cause like we're over here, and I was just like, are they gonna come look at my coats? Are
Yeah,
they spaced out properly? Like, we're freaking out. Like, our
yeah.
life's about to come to an end, and these guys are walking outside like, "Oh, man, it's early. Wow." So
Yeah,
it was just funny. It was a good
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and again, that's just another we talk about officers. They, by and large, likely had a very different officer upbringing and
Oh,
experience
yeah.
than what you have described and experience. And it's just
Oh, yeah.
there's such a wide spectrum, and it's funny to think about, especially once you detach yourself and think like in the moment. There's probably some gruff infantry master sergeants like, "Oh, guys don't know how to do the basics, crappy
Right.
soldiers don't." But again, when you're removed, like, who cares? Like, that's
Right.
not why they're here. Like,
Right. Oh, it's like the school environment. I hated going to military schools. Not because
Mhm.
of the school. I love the training. I love getting to learn stuff, but I hated the like OCS. Oh my God, I about lost my freaking mind
Mhm.
because you get everybody there, and it's like the simple things were like the end of the world. Like, where do I have to put my shoes on? Like, cause just it's white socks.
Yeah,
Holy crap! So, the black
yeah.
socks weren't authorized yet. And I'm like, this is you don't.
No. I had the, again, opposite of infantry experience. I went to distance learning master leaders course. So again,
Oh,
right on brand, right? keeping my experience on brand. But C is general, that's a general thing. So
yeah,
everyone who's making master sergeant got to go to MLC. Um, but it's not MOS specific like most
no, no,
NCOS courses. So I'm in there like doing group projects with like guys that are far flung in the world. And they're like, "Hey, here's a combat scenario," and like talking about like flanking and like combat operations. I'm like, whoa, like
no clue.
I don't know anything that you're saying. Like, I'm like, we're doing this. I have to do a group project. I'm like, look, guys, I can write really well. Like, I am an exceptional communicator. I can write an essay like a boss. I have no idea what we're talking about. Like they're like, "Dude, we got to do battle
Oh,
plans. We got to do like all the made up battles and do the analysis of what went wrong." And I'm like I'm a smart guy, but again, I've
tell me
literally
about it. I'll
never
write it.
done any of this. And now
Oh,
it's like, "Hey, well, you got to do this. You're going to be a first sergeant. You might use this one day." I'm like, "No, I won't. I'm a
we're
recruiter.
recruiting.
I will use this
Never.
never."
If I
Um,
do, the South is falling again. I'm sorry.
oh yeah, like if I have to use the stuff that I learned in MLC, things have gone
So
seriously
bad.
wrong.
I remember when I was in WLC.
Yeah.
My small group leader was, or whatever it was, the terminology was he's a signal guy, and we're doing this massive movement. And same thing, it's joint MOSs. We got all this and joint sexes,
Mhm.
and I had these aircraft mechanic people that were just like, we don't road march ever, and so we had to do one of our things was road march down this thing. And for me, they gave me the plan. I grabbed all the infantry guys and like, hey, here's the op order, and let's go. And like our receive the mission to execute the begin movement was like 5 minutes. Like, let's go.
Oh yeah.
We're like rescuing some like broken down truck or whatever, and we're running on this fire break, and
Mhm.
the rail be like, hey, you're forgetting half your platoon. I look back there, and there's like all the opposite of infantry are like, we don't do this. We don't know
Oh
how to
yeah.
run with a rucksack. Like, what
Oh
the crap
yeah.
are y'all doing?
Yeah.
You know?
You could
And
probably recall some times in recruiting school. Like you said, officers come from everywhere.
oh yeah.
So do the CSMs. We haven't had
Mhm.
a like an actual 79 Romeo recruiting sergeant major of recruiting command in quite some time. But I've heard a lot of flack being given. I'll speak carefully because I'm still around. But
Ready?
they'll be at a course at USREC for any number of their courses, and they're like, "We're gonna take everyone out on like a 5 mile run, and we'll do it at a slow pace." And then when half of I wouldn't say half, but lots of people fall out.
High percent.
It's like I think it goes back to that perspective that we were talking about earlier. Is like the novelty of things. Like when you're at hometown USA, if you're not a intrinsic, like I'm not a running guy, like some people are. Some people are weightlifting guys. I mean, you
Right.
might be a gym guy, you might be a CrossFit guy, you might be a Ninja Warrior guy. There's tons of
Yeah.
stuff you can be into. So yeah, see, I think couch. So this idea of like there's a segment of soldiers in recruiting command and elsewhere that says, hey, the army says I need to run 2 miles. I can do that. So when they're like, "Hey, we're going to run 5," I don't care what pace it is. Like
Nope.
there's a realistic segment of
Oh yeah.
soldiers that are like, "Nope, like I can run like this. I can run 2. Well,
Required to run
3,
2
yeah,
twice a year.
yeah, exactly." So,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of flack, especially when you get leaders that come from various backgrounds and are like, "Why is everyone
What's
falling
the
out?"
crap matter with you?
Yeah, we don't
Yeah, yeah.
unless you have it in you and you're that kind that like, "Hey, I'm gonna max the PT test." And again, it's that same mentality. It's different experiences. That's not everyone. Not everyone is super hula. Not everyone in the military is gonna run 5, 10 miles a day. I know people that still do. I know
Yeah.
people that retire and
We call them
continue
crazy.
running. Yeah. Right?
I think
So I think
I
this idea of coming where especially from a leadership perspective, when you're like, we're all gonna go do
yeah.
this thing, whether it be running or whether it be running battle drills, and then getting super mad when people can't do it, you're like, well, like keep in mind where these people are at in their lives
Yeah.
and in their careers. Not everyone is super hula, and
Yeah.
that's
Well,
fine.
that was probably the hardest. You mentioned that looking back, it's kind of reminded me that one of the weirdest things to accommodate was, I mentioned like the what you're on your own in
Mhm,
recruiting, and but even when I got into the maintenance and other stuff was
mhm,
the opposite of infantry. Everything in the infantry was always with your entire team. Like
mhm.
we did squad PT or platoon PT, and like and there's guys that were just like, hey, today we're gonna sprint 1 mile, do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, sprint 1 mile, 100. You're like, I'm not gonna make it. This is gonna be a long damn day. You know, you get done, you're like, I can't feel my throat. You know,
Yeah,
what's going on?
yeah,
But then I got to recruiting and stuff, and that's probably the most common thing I've noticed a difference. If there's a difference
yeah,
is that, you know, it's about the team part of it where I've never recruiting was just we never did organized PT ever.
yeah.
Like when I was in school, not one single time. And then we did I think about it, we did twice. We all met at the local gym that the research was paying for because we had PT test coming up, and that was it. But drove me nuts. And then I was like, okay, like if I'm an officer, we'll do this. And I saw the same thing where it's like people out doing PT in like groups of 2 or 3, if that. I'm like,
Mhm.
I joined the army because that's what my preconceived notion was, that like we do all this group stuff and we can organize together, be
Mhm.
physically fit, and not have to be a powerlifter, just be fit.
Yeah.
And I struggled immensely. I'll admit it. And
Yeah.
I do not work well, like self fitness. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
can go do some stuff on my own here and there, but like my infantry days were great because like a group of 9, there's a massive accountability of
Mhm.
like, and we literally will drag you into shape,
Yeah.
you know, and you can do
Yeah.
that anywhere else. You can do that,
Oh, yeah, and
you
it's
get
hit and miss. I had a recruiting station where we were like that. They would drug
uh,
me when I was fresh out of the reserve. So I did 8 years in the reserve with 2 mobilizations. So again, like you said, it was always self-starting because group
mm,
PT on a Saturday does not make your month. So that was like really one of my first experiences of like really group organized, ironically, is USREC. Is I had a recruiting station that was like that, where like they drugged me to the gym, and I was dying because I was like, "What is happening? Why are we doing all this stuff?" Like, and that was because I'd never
power
had like
clean.
I never had the
Yeah,
prototypical army experience to that
right.
point. Um, so that was strangely enough that way they were like, "Oh, we're gonna get this reserve guy and
Right.
whip him into shit." Because I'm just like, I'm walking in, they're like, "What do under the old 300 system?" I was like, "Yeah, rocking like a 220." And they're like, "No, no," because they had a high station average and they were
Right.
proud of that. And they're like, "We're not gonna have you come in and screw up our average." So they're like, "We're
Yeah.
gonna kill you in the gym." And I was like, "Whoa, this is," and it was kind of like what you were talking about, like, "Oh, this is what people talk about in the army." Like, but it was 8, 9 years in
Yeah.
after like I was already E6 at that time. So again, just such different experiences,
Oh yeah.
and so it's so funny,
Vastly.
like seeing just you craving it and me coming up like, oh, like just that's what that is. And there's been so
Yeah.
many of those that probably
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of people in the guard and reserve that, similar careers that in the, the support side that
Yeah.
you have those kind of moments where you're like, oh, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, this is
Well,
that
even
stereotype of the army. Some of us do you may never experience it or you hit it way later and then it's kind of like a light bulb goes off.
then you get the guys on the combat arms side that are like, "Oh, well, why do we have to do organized PT?
Yeah.
I score a 320. I should be able to do it on my own." It's
Yeah.
like there's the opposite
Yeah.
of that as well. This drives me crazy. So
Yeah. So now that you've had some time, obviously you've gone on to do well for yourself. You've got your ear to the ground. You're very active in the veteran community. How do you see this concept? Obviously, we talked about while you were in. How have you seen this dynamic in the veteran community? Do you think it fades away? This kind of elitism, the stepbrothers mentality, the hogue leg, sibling rivalry, trash talk. Do you think that kind of lessens and people are more mellow, or do you think that there's instances where it gets worse? Talk about kind of that transition going from in service to now you're in this theoretically unified veteran community.
yeah.
Do you still encounter kind of the spectrum from the friendly rivalry, the stepbrothers thing, to all the way out to that toxicity and the super tribalism?
There's both. Honestly, and sadly, I would say it's worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's actually drastically worse. Based off amongst different branches, I don't think it's so bad. It was because
Mhm.
that's more of a stepbrother when you're out.
Yeah.
Is, "Oh, you're the Navy. Oh, look at you, a squid." Like,
Yeah, yeah, just
it's
having
just,
fun.
and it's funny, and nobody really cares in that regard.
Yeah.
It gets worse when it's too close to home.
Mhm.
And what I think happens, why I think it's worse, is that there's, not to be political, and I don't wanna get into all
Sure.
that either, but
Yeah.
it's like, just be honest with your own experiences. And I think when
Yeah.
people of anything, doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're just trying to be a banker, go be a
Mhm.
banker. But if you're a 42 Alpha, be a 42 Alpha when you're a banker. Who cares? And
Yeah.
like, hey, if people want to ask you questions, just tell them what you did. Like, I went to Kosovo and I have a
Mhm.
crazy story where I only got 1 round, like your
Yeah.
story. I think it's a hilarious story, by the way.
Yeah.
But I think you have the opposite of infantry is the motto here,
Mm.
the title. I think the veteran side of it is like people wish I was infantry
Mhm.
is what I would say. Is like they just try to make a story way bigger than what it was. It's like, look, man, like your job from the support group for us in '06, like, yeah, we are the support battalion. And man, we had a cool freaking job, man. We had to
Mhm.
like load up thousands of bottles of water and ice and get on these helicopters and get them out there. And we had to push them out these helicopters. They were in the helicopters pushing them out, dropping them to the ground for us. Like, that's cool. But
How
like,
much how much do you think imposter syndrome plays a role in that? Do you think there could
I,
be an
I,
element
I,
of imposter syndrome
I
of
think
like,
it's
"Hey, my
huge.
service wasn't good enough, so maybe I feel like I have to
100%.
church it up more because I
I
feel
absolutely.
inferior?"
I think there's like I joke, I've never met a Marine that wasn't a sniper. I haven't. I mean, it's the weirdest thing in the world. Every single Marine veteran I've ever talked to was recon sniper. Every one of them. I'm like, man, how do y'all ever eat lunch? Like, that doesn't mathematically add up. It's just kind of the same thing where people just want to just they're kind of like looking back, being like the funnest time that you just mentioned earlier. Like the craziest time of your career was that one time you did something in basic training, shooting a machine gun or
Yeah,
my 19. Like it's the only time you ever did it, so it
yeah,
resonates with you. And I think people get, especially the peak of the war from like '04, '03 to '09 and 10, maybe. Anybody that was support ish in that time frame that didn't, they kind of missed it in a sense.
mhm,
Maybe they deployed and like you get there and you're like, oh, I'm a finance guy and
mhm,
finance isn't doing a lot, but you're attached to the brigade. And then they task you to be chow hole ID checker. Like,
mhm.
yeah, it's not sexy, but they start adding things that are like, oh yeah, we got rocket fire every freaking day. And it's like,
Yeah,
it's okay. It's okay. Like
yep,
I have friends that are sad that they didn't ever deploy,
yep,
like they just missed it. And like
yeah,
we have no control of that. Like if you could have literally gone from PCS and just missed the rotation. It
yep.
literally has nothing to do with
Yeah.
you.
I've
And
I've come to peace with and hence the title. I've
yeah,
made the title of this show started as kind of a self-deprecating joke on myself. Like that's what I call myself. Hey, I'm the opposite of infantry. Like I've come to peace because I suffered with imposter syndrome for a while. It was like I had an opportunity to volunteer to do it to run gun trucks and I turned it down. I stayed behind and I got my associate's degree instead. I feel
right,
I don't have to look back and wonder anymore, "Oh, was I a coward? Did I make the wrong decision?" No, I got
right.
my degree.
Come
I
on.
I'm awesome at Excel. Is that sexy? No. So was it weird for me to come back in '05 and have all the civilians, they see veteran, right? So they're like, "Oh,
Right,
thank you for your service. Appreciate your
right.
support.
It's
How was the
weird.
war?" I'm like, I was doing PowerPoint briefings and Excel, and
Yeah.
I was sleeping in air
My fingers,
conditioning, like,
control
like
Z, control C. I was killing it.
Oh yeah, it's just one of those like it in the moment
Right,
in that time, I did feel kind of like fake, like, oh hey, I
right.
didn't do don't do that. Like don't think I didn't do anything. I still
Yeah.
had that. But now it's like I did do stuff. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't hardcore,
Yeah.
but it
I
is
would
I have my niche skill set and I'm at peace with that and I'm okay
right,
with that. I don't feel the need
to
to
justify.
embellish. And
I
I
would
don't know, like maybe that took some self-discovery because I've been in that time where it's like maybe you feel that, but it once in the veteran community, hopefully more people, telling funny stories on your show, coming on here talking about, the silly bureaucratic side, that isn't in the commercials. Hopefully that can encourage more people to be at peace with whatever it was, whether you didn't deploy or you did, whether you were support, combat, violent, non-violent, whether you barely passed the fitness test or killed it, we all served, right?
that
And
definitely the
ultimately,
thing I
we're
would
on the
say.
same team.
Yeah. I think the thing that I would encourage anybody of any branch is it's a very small percentage of people that qualify to put on a
Yeah,
uniform. And it's even a smaller percentage of that percentage that actually does it. And I would
yeah,
encourage anybody like, hey, like you raised your hand and you went and did this job,
yeah,
then be proud of that
yeah,
because nobody else would. And
right,
I always hammer that like I don't care what your job is. If you're a chaplain's assistant, like
yeah,
your job is to pull guard during communion. Cool.
Yeah.
That was your job. Like tell it like it was,
Yep.
and don't be shy, because I feel, and whole point of my show is that people feel that imposter syndrome. They feel that they can't. Even it can be crazy war, it can be simple. It doesn't really matter. But when
Yeah.
they're at the water cooler at the bank, I would use that as an
Mm.
analogy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
someone's, oh man, did you watch the game? Oh, did you see that throw by Patrick Mahomes? Oh, this is crazy. And, oh man, I almost got in a car wreck. And then like something in your brain triggers a memory. Like, man, this one time I shot a Mark 19. It was so cool. Like, it doesn't matter if that one time was in basic training for you or for
Yeah.
me in Afghanistan, just doing a bunch of random test fires. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. You got to
Yeah.
shoot a Mark 19. It's freaking cool. It's an automatic
Yeah.
grenade launcher. I'm a 12-year-old boy in my
Yeah.
heart. That's like, I got to shoot an
Yeah.
automatic grenade launcher. This is so cool.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like, but you want to tell that story and you don't. And like,
Yeah.
just tell it like it is. Like, oh man, it's right. You can't talk about crazy. This one time basic training, blah, 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 and tell the story.
Oh, yeah.
And people
Yeah.
don't. And I think the imposter kicks in like, oh, no one
Yeah.
wants to hear from a 44-year-old guy about basic training.
Yeah.
But like, in actuality, what I've learned from my experience is I overtell my stuff just because one, I've got a crazy career, but
Yeah.
it's fun to get people to understand like this is what healing, PTSD, whatever stuff is. All those things get a bad name because I
Yeah.
think people abuse it. It's the
Mhm.
same problem we have with everything else. And I think there's the way forward is people to tell their stories, and
Yeah.
that's why you have a show. Well, I have a show,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of veterans, and there's not enough shows. So
Yeah, absolutely. So to wrap it up here, I appreciate you having you on. The last topic I want to address is something that's near and dear to me. It's the too far stuff, the toxic tribalism. And my theory is that, and again, you're more in this, so you can kind of throw your weight behind it. But this is just a theory that I have is I think when we're in, we still have this mentality of this affiliation. Like being in the military is an overriding part of our personality and who we are. So where it's more easy to cast aside like political affiliations, religious affiliations, cultural upbringing. It's like, hey, we're all soldiers. We work together, make the mission happen, right? My theory is that maybe as we distance from that, maybe other tribes start to become more important, and we kind of push the veteran status a little bit further down and down and down. And then maybe that's how the toxic tribalism comes out. And now it's more my political affiliation is more important than my veteran affiliation or my cultural or religious or whatever tribe. My sports team affiliation is more
yeah,
important than being a veteran. And I think I'm worried. I don't want it to happen to me, and I hope it doesn't. That it becomes the tribe of veterans kind of gets pushed so far down the hierarchy that we start to cannibalize each other and attack each
yeah,
other. We have so many fights as a community with Congress and the VA to get better benefits, to get better pay, to get better
absolutely.
equipment. There's a lot of fights that need to be had. The last thing we need is veterans
Right.
attacking veterans and
Yeah,
tearing down the service of each other and belittling each other's service. And
yeah,
unfortunately, we live in a hyper polarized culture and environment where that's becoming more commonplace. And so a little bit long winded, but I want to pass that
yeah.
to you to say, what's your take on toxic tribalism in the veteran community and what can we do to combat it?
We'll one talk about it, but let's start point.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
the the toxicity, that's a big word for me, is I think the biggest risk for that is in the how the transition takes place.
Mhm.
And I would say that there's three phases of that. Is the people who transition and stick around a base and they go work at range control, right? As all of them do, and they like never leave. They
Mhm.
never, and they live in well, back in my day or
Yeah.
when I was in, and like that's if I hear that phrase, I cringe, because it's like,
The last episode we had a whole thing that let's use it. Let's use
yeah,
examples
and I,
just
because
just for fun.
when I was in recruiting,
Yep.
I'll give you a great example. I was at the guy's house. The guy's a Vietnam vet, you know, and his son was a senior, and son was super jacked. I mean, he wanted to be an airborne ranger, all this stuff. Because I was a ranger, but I was airborne. But like this dude was just like, oh, I think kids today are just soft and blah blah blah. I'm like, why? He's like, well, back when I was in basic training, we didn't call home. I'm like, you didn't have cell phones. They didn't even
Yeah.
exist. I was
Technology
like,
wasn't there,
if
brother.
you would have had them, I promise you, they would give them to you like they do now
Yeah.
at like week 4 or 5, whatever the heck it is. Who cares?
Yeah.
They didn't have them. We didn't get on Facebook. Mark wasn't even born yet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're fighting this, like the fighting
Yeah.
of each other is more to do with that of like, oh, they're so soft nowadays. They don't polish their boots. Do we even polish our boots in 2005 when we put on freaking suede boots? Because you don't
Yeah.
polish suede. Are you like,
Yeah.
and oh, the new M17 this or the new SIG MCX, whatever, it's just like we used to cannibalize ourselves over
Mhm.
time. And then, so we cannibalize up from old generations criticizing the news, saying we're all weak. And
Mhm.
then looking down is the opposite, where
Mhm.
I can't give you an RCOM because an RCOM in World War II was like just a step below Medal of Honor. And so now today it's just like we have this like weird view of like, I can't give you this award because 80, 100 years ago, it would have been this. It would have
Oh,
been like
yeah.
a pat on the back, you didn't die. So it's like a reverse clash of
Yeah.
time. And then you have in the middle of that clash, for me, is the Vietnam vets that got spit on and
Right.
all these things and just got treated horribly. And then now we have this, we're trying to fix it. And we've been trying to fix it for like 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where for me is like we kill each other with this stuff of
Oh, yeah.
the worst thing. It doesn't matter what your branch or MOS was. It's like the most common thing I hear is when I was in. I'm like, man, when I
Mhm.
was in, I wore BDUs, DCUs, ACUs,
Yeah.
whatever the heck they're wearing now. I'm
Mm.
like, every one of the transitions. So I went to the green pickle suit to
Mhm.
the dress uniform. Now it's the Army. I never got the browns or whatever the term is.
Pink and
And
green, we call 'em.
these are greens, yeah, I never wore them. I retired before I was required to
Yeah.
required, yeah, to get them. But I think the cannibalism happens there more than
Mhm.
anything else. Is just people just like, well, back in my day, we used to run 2 miles uphill both ways, all that stuff. But I
Yeah,
used
yeah.
to joke, "Why does it take 5 Rangers to change a light bulb?" And it's 1 to change the bulb, the other 4 to tell stories of how hard it used to be. And
Yeah.
I think that's until we can figure out how, like, people to universally understand that the song says army goes rolling along for a reason. It's going to keep going. You're going to get out and it's not going to care anymore the day you get out.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and that hard cutoff sucks. So
Yeah.
the other categories are those that like me, who I stay in the community and I'm still trying to like, I'm still very familiar with what's kind of going on and not criticizing like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this. I cannot believe they put freaking army marketing under use right. What kind of freaking crazy? They made it a 3-star. It's all going to hell. Whatever, right? It's a true story, right? It's all
Yeah.
that's I'm sure there's plenty of meetings where people are saying that. And
Yeah.
then the guys that I think the worst, the most dangerous at risk for me is suicide. Is the guys that get out
Mhm.
and move out into the middle of nowhere and
Mhm.
completely disconnect. And
Yeah.
that first like 3 or 4 years, it hits them. I think
Mhm.
that's where suicide lives. That's just my theory. So
Yep. Yep. Well, I appreciate it. Quick anecdote. You mentioned the awards, the back in my day awards. So my again, very on brand. When I say opposite of infantry, I got it all. So I want to end it on a fun note here. So my both of my mobilizations, I got AEMs. You can People can argue the merits of that up or down either way. But again, put it in perspective, right? So 8 months in Kosovo, a year in Kuwait, AEM apiece. Cool. Fast forward down the road, I win a professional writing contest. So I wrote an essay and got an Archon. True story.
I love it.
So so
It's awesome.
again, how much stock are you really gonna put in this? Like you gotta be again, you gotta laugh at it, you gotta be silly.
Yeah.
Like I wrote the
Awesome.
essay that I wrote is ranked higher than probably both of my
Yeah.
mobilizations put together. Again, let's be real, guys. Like it's not that serious.
And I'll tell you the other day, whenever you hang it up and you have a really cool piece of paper that says 214 on it,
Yeah, yeah,
nobody cares.
exactly.
Like
Yeah,
nobody I talk to, I do consulting with businesses all the time. Not
yeah,
one person's like, well, how many Arcoms you got there, Mr. Womack? I'm like,
yeah,
what?
yeah.
Like nobody cares. It means nothing.
Oh yeah,
My
yeah,
favorite thing, honestly, if you want to of all my, I got some stuff behind me, as you can see, the stuff that I've done, but whatever. But
yeah,
my favorite thing is honestly my coins, because for
yeah,
me, coins are stories. And
yeah.
my wife like loves to just, what about that one? And I just tell her like, what crazy thing? Like I got my first AAM was for not getting deported from the US for illegally importing munitions to the United States.
That's awesome.
I was enlisted E4 Division 82nd Airborne Division Gunner of the Year, and I
Yeah.
got a coin for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Like
didn't
I
get
said, it's
deported.
silly. Like,
I was handcuffed literally at an air base in New Jersey because we didn't have paperwork to bring in freaking Gimler rockets into the US. And so
yeah.
we're on an Emirati jet with Emirati pilots, and it was
Yeah.
really suspect, you know.
Yeah.
I got an AM for talking my way out of it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
So,
like,
and
super
again, it's
big.
one of those at the time we can be mad and grumbly and like,
Yeah.
oh, this is BS. But, now looking back, I'm like, it's silly. Like,
It means the world to Joe. And I was like, and this
exactly.
for me. When I was a
Yeah.
commander, I'm like, I give it AMs all the time. My commander, why he gives me? I'm like, sir, I don't have a quota.
Yeah.
I don't have a rations. Like
Paper.
they're going
We're
to
not
get
paying
out
for the paper.
for them. Going home and seeing mom and mom seeing one more ribbon means the world. In the end of the day, it means
Absolutely.
nothing. Who cares? Mom's
Yeah.
happy and soldiers
Yeah.
happy and the morale's happy. Who cares?
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's my soapbox for the day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No,
Again, let's keep telling stories. I love
absolutely.
your show. And definitely, if you want to give a plug, give it. How can people contact you? How can people find your show?
Yeah. So my website for sign up is womackc3.com/STIW. So there I was.
So there I was. So you left out the first part of that phrase.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
Apple iTunes probably wouldn't have approved that, huh?
yeah, you gotta be careful with that.
All
So
right. So Travis, and you're on LinkedIn as well?
yeah, on LinkedIn, absolutely. And if you, by all means, hit me up. My personal phone number is on my LinkedIn, and I do it for a reason. So I'm always here for any vet to ever give me a call. Please do before you make a permanent bad decision.
Absolutely. Well, Travis, it's been a blast chatting with you as always. Thank you so much for supporting this new initiative. And thank you for what you do for the veteran community and for all the veterans and service members. Like you said, some people disconnect. You've been really active and you're one of the people that I definitely look up to and hope that I'll be leaning on you as I enter my transition period here in the next few years. So thank you so much again, and always a blast talking to you.
Thanks a lot.
All right.